Greetings and welcome back to Intersections. It has been a while, my friends, since we were in connection with each other. I think we've skipped the last couple of weeks. Things got a little bit busy for me in the resurgence of teaching commitments at Columbia, as well as business activity broadly. And at the same time, I have been missing you all and have been so looking forward to this moment for two reasons. One is just to be reconnected and be back in this mode where all of us are engaging in an intersection between our pathways in life and an intersection of fusing all kinds of opposing ideas, thoughts, and paths that sometimes make us get too narrowly confined. But when we bring them together and integrate them, whether it is science and spirituality, profit and purpose, east and west, inner and outer, then great things can happen. The second reason I'm thrilled to be back is because I have a really special leader, friend, and human being with us today in Ferose. I'm going to introduce Ferose to you in the next couple of minutes, and then we will bring him on to have what I know is going to be for you a very heartfelt and powerful conversation. In the meanwhile, do sign in, do use chat to say hello, share with us where you're from. Anobik is going to start presenting some of those greetings on the screen as well, my colleague. And then we're going to get going, all right? And so here goes. Let me introduce to you with great pleasure, Ferose. Bear with me 1 second as I just bring Ferose up. So Ferose heads the Academy of Engineering at SAP, a critical role that he's taken on in the last several months. He is award-winning in many regards, an inspiring leader in many regards, a philanthropist and an author. So he wears a number of great hats. He got his Bachelor's of Technology in Computer Science and Engineering from the National Institute of Technology in India. He has been part of the Young Global Leaders Program at Harvard. And at SAP, he was one of the youngest chief executives of a global multinational in India for them. He was heading SAP Labs, which got ranked as one of the great places to work, for the first time under his stewardship. He has been doing a number of other things also in order to continue to kind of contribute to the advancement of humanity. He is a chairperson at an institute here in the United States, which is a non-profit helping people with autism and other disabilities, Special Listerine. He is the founder of the India Inclusion Summit, a non-profit that is focused on bringing inclusion to the forefront of India. He guest lectures often in my class and leaves students extremely wiser and more inspired. He has created an Autism at Work program at SAP, which employs over 175 individuals across the autism spectrum across the world at SAP. And 90% of them have been retained over time. And it's also been adapted and adopted by 150 companies beyond SAP as well. This has been translated into a case study at Harvard Business School. His work has gained acclaim and recognition, and he's been gaining invitations to go and shape the thinking of world leaders across a range of different other organizations and through a range of leading media, including the World Economic Forum. He is much decorated as a social impact leader, and he has also sought to always stay at the cutting edge of science, bringing in new disciplines like neurodiversity, and also embracing some of the modern movements like inclusion into his own work as well. Finally, in his thought leadership, he's been very inspirational. He's written a few really powerful, evocative, story-rich books that I encourage any of us to read if you want to really understand and explore the highest potentialities in the human condition, even when we're otherwise beaten up, by life. And he's also an active voice in the media so that you can find his articles on a regular basis, offering fresh wisdom and insights based on what's going on in the world. And so with that background, it is a joy for me to introduce in our midst, Ferose. Ferose, warm welcome to you.
Thank you, sir, Professor Hitendra. It's always a joy having this conversation with you, and I must confess that was a very eloquent introductions. I always get embarrassed because I always feel introductions are pretty one-sided, right? They only talk about the good things, and I must confess a lot of things that I've done are not necessarily as good as it sounds, but I really appreciate your fantastic introduction. Thank you so much.
Well, I know I'm grateful for that. Yeah, just spontaneous expression of such sweet humility. Feroz. Well, I'll share one thing. I mean, one of our illustrious alums at Columbia Business School, Warren Buffett. One of my students shared the story with me that he once said. He said, I like to follow the 10% rule, and that is that whoever I meet, I know that 10% of that person is truly inspiring. And
Thank
so for
you.
me, it's a process of discovery. Life is like
Yeah,
this puzzle. It keeps
yeah,
throwing me in front of certain people. And now I
yeah,
want to discover what that 10% is. Well, in your case, Feroz,
yeah,
I know you enough to know that that 10% is at the minimum at least 80%, 90%. I don't know, it probably is 100%. But if you're being humble enough to say there are a few things, beyond this bio that I've shared, then I'm sure that's in the small minority of all that who you are. So it's
thank you.
beautiful to have you here. And what I thought maybe we can do
Yeah,
is start with introducing a little bit of your work as a leader at SAP,
yeah, yeah,
and then move from leadership to life and leadership.
yeah,
So, to that end, Feroz, if that's okay with you,
yeah,
can I turn to a moment, a
yeah,
seminal moment in your career at SAP, where what were you at that time?
yeah,
32,
yeah,
33?
yeah,
And
yeah,
you get this outreach from the
yeah,
executive board at SAP
yeah,
asking you for something.
yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, I mean, I may have to rewind a little bit. You're taking me back memory lane. So this was in 2010 when I get a call from the executive board. They asked me to fly down to Germany, and I'm having this conversation with the board member, and he says, Feroz, we do have some challenge at SAP Labs in Bangalore and in India, and would we want you to take this up and fix this issue and resolve this as quickly as possible. So in many ways, that call was a defining moment for me in my career. Firstly, I was pretty young. I hadn't realized that I could be ready to take such a big step in my career. So when the executive board member asked me to take up this challenge, it was a little overwhelming, not realizing that whether I could pull this off. So that was a huge moment for me from a career point of view.
And what was it that they asked you to take on, which was so imposing?
So, just to give you a context, SAP Labs is one of the second largest R&D hubs of SAP worldwide. SAP is a German multinational, and SAP Labs India was the second largest R&D hub with more than 5,000 employees in India across at that time Gurgaon and in Bangalore. And we realized the board felt that there were three major issues we were fighting at that time. The first was we had seen a massive decline in employee engagement, which was a very important metric for the company. We do this annual employee survey, goes through many number of questions, and we found that there was a dramatic decline of almost 13 percentage points in the engagement of the overall employees. The second thing we realized is that our attrition rates were at an all-time high. I mean, tech industry obviously has a high attrition rate, but in our case, it was more than what the average attrition rate was. So that was the second big problem that we felt. And the third, which was pretty disturbing, is that a lot of the employees had reached out to the global leadership and said that they had lost trust in local leadership, and so there was some kind of an employee activism where they kind of said we don't trust the leadership anymore. And so those were the three major challenges that the board felt that I should immediately resolve.
Right. Can we all like put ourselves in Feroz's shoes? Like that must have been an imposing mandate to take on. Did you ever even feel diminution of confidence in terms of, can I actually do this? Is it even going to be in my control and in my power to turn some of these ambitious metrics around?
you know as I said, I never had the experience to do any of that. And I did speak to a few of my friends and said, do you think I should take this offer, and do you think I can do this? And honestly, the good news was that the board didn't give me any options, so they just asked me to do it. So sometimes when you don't have a plan B, you just have to do it. But a few of my friends did say that this could be a life-changing moment, if you could pull it off. But I also recognize there's a downside to it, because this is going to be an incredibly hard journey. I took it upon myself, but I obviously had to ask my wife, and I had a very young son at that time. He was just, I think, if I remember, 9 to 10 months old. I knew this was a major challenge that I'm taking up, and so I asked my wife about it, and she said, "Yeah, let's do it." She was extremely supportive. So yes, I took up the challenge, relocated to Bangalore, and I started my role on 1st of April 2010. And I jokingly say it was April Fool's Day, but I don't know whether it was any indication of anything, but that I remember that date very, very clearly.
Yeah, beautiful. We have so much richness in this and so many other chapters of your life story. So maybe we can be a little bit targeted here, Feroze, in the
Yeah,
confines of the time we have.
sure.
Could you tell us, like, what are the 2 or 3 things you did
Yeah,
which could provide a powerful leadership lesson for our audience?
yeah,
Because I know the story has a happy ending, but
yeah,
how did you get there might be even more interesting.
yeah. I think the first thing I realized was, you have to be very open to share the problem, right? And so what the first activity that I did was reached out to almost 200 employees across different levels to really understand what is the biggest challenge they are facing. But more importantly, what I did was I reopened the blog. There was a blog where there were thousands of comments. Many of them were pretty not so positive, and I said, let's look at that, because maybe the problem lies somewhere there. We'll really know what the people are thinking. I kind of consolidated the key problems into 5 actionable areas, and I put it out there in front of all the employees and say, I have heard you. I think these are the big things that you're speaking about, but here is the bad news. I don't know how to solve it, but I think we can solve it together. I think that was for me the most important step when I look back in retrospect, that I went in with an understanding that the solution can be built together with the employees. So I reached out to the employees and say, we are starting these 5 projects, but this will be extremely time bound. This is part of my 100-day plan. And, we will solve this problem together. And this is a very counterintuitive approach. Sometimes we have this superhero thinking in our mind that you are the CEO, you are the head, you are the managing director, you know all. I actually flipped it and said, I don't know what the problem is, but I'll be extremely transparent with how we're going to solve it, and measure us on the progress against these 5 projects, which I felt was the most important things that needed immediate attention. So I think that was the first and the most important activity that I did. And, I found so many people volunteering to work together. And so you suddenly started getting the energy of the people to solve a problem that was important for them.
That's very beautiful. In business speak, we like to think about this idea of co-creation, right?
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
it's quite clear that you walked into that space and
yeah,
allowed them to be deeply invested and contributing. Then we talk about this idea of distributed leadership, this notion of sort of having leadership be in some ways democratized,
yeah,
because you never know where the good ideas might come out from, isn't it? And
absolutely.
did you actually find that? Did you find that some of the insights or breakthroughs came from unexpected places?
Oh, all the time. In fact, I wouldn't take any credit for any of the ideas that came, because it was all ideas from the employees. But what was very important as a leader was to be decisive, right? I mean, you will sometimes get overwhelmed with the number of ideas, but I think the role of a leader is to figure out what is the most important one and be very decisive and execute it. I think execution is so key. And I'll give you 2 specific examples, because I think that will kind of give a context. And what I realized was sometimes the best ideas are not the big earth shattering big changes. Sometimes they are the small ones, but they matter a lot, right? So 2 things I heard constantly as a feedback was that SAP as an organization was pretty large and it had become extremely bureaucratic. So a lot of engineers said, I'm spending a lot of time doing things which is not my core task. If I'm an engineer, I want to write beautiful code and make great products. But can you help us reduce all the impediments on the way? And so we looked at what are the impediments, and we looked at the various processes. And I'll give you one example, which was pretty surprising but not uncommon. And that was how much time it took for our employees to get their claims reimbursement. This is something that will resonate with anybody who's working in an organization where there is travel involved. And people said it took them 6 weeks before they got the money back. So if you're doing a travel, you put your claims, and then it takes them 6 weeks on an average to get the money back. And when I looked at it, I said, wow, that's a lot of time. Because people are waiting, and some of them have large claims because they have made international travels and so on. So we looked at not just this process, but we looked at many processes, and we started a project called Challenge One. And we said our objective is to ensure that the process that touches people have the lowest time in terms of the SLA. So we want to bring down the SLA of every process to 1 day. And so what took 6 weeks over a period of 2-3 months of various brainstorming, and one of the employees came up with this brilliant idea that we think we can bring it down to 1 day. But I had put a boundary condition. I said, you're not going to get more resources, you're not going to get additional budget, and you can't break the compliance rules. Figure out how to work within these three constraints. Don't ask me for more money and more people, and you can't take shortcuts. And guess what? It was the finance department themselves, because they knew what the process was. And they came up and said, yeah, I think we can do this in 1 day. And nobody would believe this, right? And I remember launching this and I sending a mail to 5,000 employees. And I said, you know what? Starting today, if you put a claim if you raise a claim, you will get the money in your bank within 24 hours, and you will get an SMS which says this money has been deposited in your account. And I said, if you don't get it in 24 hours, here is my phone number, give me a call. And it was pretty scary, honestly, Professor Hitendra, I can tell you. But we had every morning we used to have a dashboard. We used to look at, okay, there are 500 claims. How many of them did we give it, where we were able to process within 24 hours? And of course, there were some ironing issues, and, you had a few that didn't do it. But over a period of time, that became the norm. And it became so popular that it suddenly reached the media stories, and Times of India called and said, is this true? I hear that you can do a claims processing in 1 day. What software have you used? I said, we didn't do any new software. We just cleaned up the process, which was 10 steps to maybe 2 steps, and that's all we did. And they said, can we come and test it? I said, test it by asking to any of the 5,000 employees. No problem. You can come and do an interview. The average time at that point, Professor, in the industry was 4 weeks. We did it in 1 day. And what it did was that it immediately raised the trust of the employees. The employee said, here is a leader who wants to solve our problem. If you look, it was we didn't build a new product or anything. We just removed an impediment, and people started believing that, okay, now leadership is working in our interest. So that was probably the simplest thing we did, but also had the highest impact.
Yeah. It's there are so many lessons just in that story, even though I know you have many other steps you took during that sort of transformation journey as well. But I see a little bit of like the Gandhi's Dandi March kind of like metaphor there of taking something really simple, which was in his case the salt and the tax that the British had imposed on salt, which is giving a lot of pain to people, and people think is kind of broadly unfair, and it's hurting everyone, including all the junior most, and etc. Really serving them through that one pivotal kind of, if you want to call it, stance or stand that you take, and committing to kind of like getting to address that, right? And through that pivotal stance, you communicate trust, you communicate servant leader, kind of an approach. You also infuse them with a sense of self-efficacy, that I can do it, that we can do it, that we can achieve breakthroughs, And if we can do that at small levels, then we could, over time do that at big levels. So I
Yeah.
see the seeds of really great leadership being sown right in that moment, Feroze.
Yeah.
I want to start transitioning to the other story, so
Yeah.
that I want to highlight for our audience. So
Yeah.
before we do that, to close this out, could you talk about, is there any one other action that is important to highlight that got you to the outcome? And then could you just summarize and close with
Yeah.
sharing the outcome?
Yeah. So I think one was to be, bold and ambitious. So one of the things we did also was we said, we want to make SAP Labs a great place to work. This is an annual survey that is done. We've been participating for many years. We said, what does it take to really break into the Great Place to Work survey, which is typically around, between 800 to 1,000 companies participate, and we want to be playing in the top league. So, I made this bold commitment that we will become the number one in terms of the Great Place to Work over the next few years. And that was a bold commitment, but so that was very important to keep a certain goal, which was big, which was ambitious, which was aspirational. And of course, you have to do a lot of things to get there. So that was really the end game that we were aspiring for. But I'll give you one small instance, which I think is very important, is that when I looked at the attrition numbers, we were in higher double-digit numbers, but a significant portion of that attrition was because we found that a lot of our women employees, and we had at that time 30% women employees, they were going on maternity leave and not coming back. So they would take a maternity leave, but for whatever reasons, for personal reasons and other things, they were not coming back to SAP. We had an attrition rate of 95% amongst this category who were taking maternity leave. And so it was very interesting that we had this 5 mothers, who came back and said, "I would like to work on this problem statement." And the suggestion they gave us, Feroze, can we build a creche within the SAP campus? And SAP campus was, large and 23 acres of land and so on. And it looked like a big ask, but we looked at the pros and cons, and after going through a lot of challenges, we actually built a creche for children within the SAP campus, actually just on the boundary of the SAP campus. And guess what, Professor Hitendra, in 2 years time, our attrition went down from 95% to 5%, which means of all the women who went for maternity leave, most of them actually came back and continued working there. And in 2 years' time, we were voted the best place for women to work in the whole country. So that, I think, was a massive thing to do, which was never heard of in Indian multinationals, that you build a creche for your employees to keep their children. And many of the mothers said, I work with so much of a sense of peace that my productivity has increased. I know during my lunch break, I can go and see my kid and come back. So that was, again, I think, a very pivotal moment when I look back. And even now, we all are extremely proud of having done that. And that was a huge step in including our employees in their holistic journey. It was not just about work, but we also wanted to take care about their families.
Yeah. That's a great point. Inclusion being not just about which voices are heard in the organization,
Exactly.
but how much of a whole person view we are taking in supporting them and making them feel at peace about their contributions and time and commitments at work. How beautiful. And then that quest you were on to catapult SAP to the top echelons of great place to work for women, but also more broadly, just overall, where did you end up on that?
So in 2012, which was when we were aspiring to be number one, we were 23 out of 800 companies, but we were the first time we broke into the top 25. They only give a ranking of 25. So we broke into that into 2012. In 2013, we were, if I remember, we were number 5. And in 2015, we became number 1. So, and in the last 3 years, we've been either number 1 or number 2 great place to work in India. So, yeah,
great. Well, I'm going to use Divya's comment here as a way to express the collective, I think, response from everyone in the audience. So that is a beautiful story for us. And I think it's time to turn our attention to another chapter and track that you're on in your life, which I think began somewhere in the midst of all of this, craziness and adventure that
Yeah.
you were on. And so, what was that moment where something happened in your life that woke you up to a different reality?
Yeah. You're right. I mean, this was deeply intertwined with my journey that I shared in the first part. So, April 2010, I take over this MD role. I have this ambitious 100-day plan, and we're doing a lot of stuff. And I think it was in the month of June or July that, I had gone out for a dinner, and through a conversation, somebody pointed out to me that my son may have some challenges because he was, really not making eye contact. He was at that time just 15 months old, and we didn't see any challenge in him. He had, his development and growth was, as expected. But one of my friends noticed that he was not making eye contact, and he was kind of doing the same things over and over again. He was looking at things that were constantly rotating. And during that conversation, he said, maybe you should take him to a doctor and check if he has any issues. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, no, maybe you should check if he's on the autism spectrum. And, I didn't, while I took it seriously, I really didn't think he meant it that way. But I went home and really checked what is autism, like we all do, right? We have Dr. Google as our first reach. Before we reach any actual doctor, we look at Google and said, so I really looked up what is autism. And then internet has these simple ways to check if there is any issue. So I looked at all the behavior of young kids who could be autistic, and I was taken aback that actually my son was showing many of them in very subtle manners. And so I told my wife, I think it's not a bad idea. Let's go to a doctor and check him out. And so that started a journey which took almost 3 months of going from one doctor to the other, from one specialist to the other, from one therapist to the other. And finally, the doctor actually gave us a diagnosis, and a official diagnosis. He said he's on the autism spectrum. This is a condition for life, but with therapies you could see great improvements. And he was too young for he said, we don't know what level he's, is he a mildly autistic, is he severely autistic? He said time will tell, but get on to some therapies immediately. And I remember that moment. On one side I was riding this high of this great so-called success, what the world sees as success, of running this large organization, trying to turn it around. And on the personal side, I was shattered. He was my only son, and they said it was a condition for life. And so what seemed like a perfect, well crafted life, where I was very fortunate. I married my college sweetheart. And so you've kind of got this idea of what a perfect life could be. And suddenly it seems to all go out of the window in just a moment. And, I remember, you know, going to, reaching home after that diagnosis of my son, going home, locking myself in the bathroom and crying. And I said, there goes my perfect life. And I really had no understanding of how to handle it. Like everybody who goes through this, I went through my initial reaction of denial, to going through depression, in the sense that I was struggling with myself. Why did this happen to me? What have I done wrong? How do I handle this? What do I do? And so that process was incredibly painful. So you know that, I think, was a huge moment in my life. Being him being diagnosed, my son Vivan being diagnosed with autism.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Feroz. I've heard this story from you, and yet, every time you take me back there, take us back there, yeah, I feel very stirred from within. I step into your shoes, your wife's shoes. I step into that frame that you've described, which I think so many of us can relate to.
Thank you.
That we have this, just we have our own assumption of what, like, the ideal life and the good life is about, and we're all trying to control
Yeah.
all of the factors in our life to get it to conform to our vision, to our view. And yet sometimes life just throws us a wild card. Of course, today, with COVID, it's thrown almost the whole globe a wild card. We'll come back and talk about your views and thoughts on that. But in the present moment, I just want everyone to be able to step into your shoes, because you may or may not have the same experience in your life, but you perhaps had some experience where life has just dealt you one of these cards. So in that moment, there was some disappointment, some, perhaps worry, some despair, but it then went to another place. What was that trigger that took you to another place?
Yeah, so I struggled with this for maybe a month or so, and it was funny that people react to the circumstances very differently. My wife was actually pretty strong. She was, up and running the next day. She was like, okay, what do we do next? And I was not able to let go. I was still kind of stuck in my old place of why me, right? Why did this happen? And, what does the future look like? But I think there was one conversation with my mentor, Dr. Kiran Bedi, who's a very well-known person in India and around the world. That really pivoted me to a completely different action and state of mind, more importantly. And during this course of conversation, I really broke down and I said, ma'am, Vivan is diagnosed with autism. I really don't know what to do. And then she said something incredibly profound, which allowed me to see the situation completely differently. And she said, Firoz, most people spend their entire lifetime not knowing what their purpose is. You are incredibly fortunate that you found your purpose through Vivan. And what she meant was, she was saying, see, you are a very fortunate person. You are in a position of power and authority, and you have the financial means, and you have the network. And as a father, I'm sure you will do everything to take care of your son. And that is what every parent in the world would do. But how do you use the situation that you are in to not just make a difference for your son, but others who are less fortunate? So I said, make this your purpose for life. Obviously, your primary responsibility is to take care of your son, but use your position and your network and your influence to change and make the world a better place for many other kids like Vivan who are less fortunate. And I don't know, for when I heard that, in my mind, it was like a switch going, completely turning it on. And suddenly, from seeing myself as a victim of the situation, I started seeing myself as somebody who could be a change agent for this particular challenge, or for all of this, for a larger good. And the reality is, I really didn't know what to do. I mean, while this sounded great, but what do you do? And so for my real journey started then, where I was trying to understand what is the problem, not just with autism, which started with autism, but I was trying to understand the landscape in India and what is it that I can contribute in a meaningful manner. So the journey of discovery really started after that phone call. Even then, as I said, I didn't know what to do. Like everybody else, I was watching all the TED Talks and talking to people and trying to understand. And I was in a journey of discovery for the next few months.
Yeah. Um, I want to continue with your narrative on that
Yeah.
journey. Before we do that, let me just turn to our audience and ask you in the chat window, can you share like what's your biggest lesson from this moment where Feroz, in the midst of despair, reaches out, has this conversation with one of his illustrious mentors, and then she paints this vision for him that turns a switch on in him, and now he is re-entering the world with a whole different frame, not yet with an answer in mind, but certainly with a much different intention than what he entered the conversation with. So if you take that whole narrative arc, that what you've just shared, Feroz, I love to look at stories and life journeys and chapters as just crucibles, for new learnings, new insights. And so I'm going to just turn to our audience and say, what is the one big lesson that you're taking away from that could be actionable for all of us? And use chat, share that with us. And as you do, we'll keep moving forward in this story. Rose, what happened next? How did you take this, aspirational and intriguing sort of invitation that you got from her and translate it into something practical?
Yeah, so I think the journey from then still continues. And, this is way back in 2010. It's been almost a decade since I've been in this journey. And, there have been a lot of highs and lows, but it's beyond doubt the most fulfilling part of my life, the most meaningful part of my life has been the last decade. But I'll tell you a few highlights in that journey. The first, of course, I reached out to a lot of parents who were in a similar situation like me, and I asked them the same question: what is the biggest worry that you have? What is the biggest challenge that you have? And these were all parents who had autistic kids or special needs children. And after speaking to many of them, I realized almost all of them was fundamentally talking about just one issue, and that was, they said, we don't know what to do after we are gone. Who will take care of our child? What future does he hold? And that seemed to be a uniform thread across all the parents that I spoke to. And so I kind of went a step deeper. In fact, I remember this conversation with a parent who said something that really broke my heart. He said, Feroz, my wish is to live one day more than my child. And I think that was the most painful statement I've ever heard. I mean, no parent wants to live one day more than their child. And the reason he was saying that is, I don't know what to do. Where will I leave my kid? Who will take care of him? And so for me, that was the thing that I was trying to understand and find some way forward. And what I realized, especially with children on the autism spectrum, and I'm using the word children, of course, they could be adults on the autism spectrum also, but I'm just using that paraphrasing right now, is that many of them are pretty gifted and they can do a few things very well, but most of them have two challenges which are universal, I would say. One is many of them have communication challenges, so their communication is not perfect, and the other is that they are not very social. So these were basically the two challenges that most people on the spectrum have, and this is what my son today has as well. He's now 11 years old. He's nonverbal. 30% of the children who are autistic are nonverbal. And of course, they are very non-social. They like to be amongst themselves. So these were two issues. And because of these two challenges, we realized that many of them, and the statistics, at least in the US, is that more than 92% of them are not meaningfully employed. So there's a huge population of people who are on the autism spectrum, and the data shows it's 1 in 65 right now, and it's getting much higher right now in terms of the number of cases. So imagine if you have such a large population of people who are on the autism spectrum, most of them are not gainfully employed. That becomes the biggest worry of many of the parents, that these kids grow up to adults and they're never independent. And one thing led to the other, and I happened to meet a Danish entrepreneur. His name is Thorkel Sonner, and he had the same situation. His son was autistic, and he said, if nobody gives him a job, maybe I will. So he started a company which employed only people on the autism spectrum, and this was not a non-profit. This was a for-profit social enterprise, and he grew that to almost 100 employees in Denmark. 80 of them, or 80% of them, were people on the autism spectrum. The remaining 20 were so-called neurotypical, who managed these 80 of them. And he found out that they could actually differentiate their business because they were hiring people on the autism spectrum, because they brought in unique strengths that others didn't. And I was blown away by this idea. I said, wow, so you are actually hiring autistic people because they are better than the others, at least in some aspects. And I was so excited that I asked my executive assistant. I said, let's go to Denmark. So so we actually flew to Denmark and spent a couple of days trying to understand what was he trying to do. And I came back and I told that, let's hire people on the autism spectrum. And people were like, is this real? I mean, most of the people whom we looked at in the community didn't have a college degree. They mostly had education only up to middle school or high school. So how do we hire these employees who are on the autism spectrum onto SAP when they don't have the skills to do it? And that's where we realized that if you focus on a specific task, and in this case, we looked at software testing as a task, that people on the spectrum could do way better than the others because they could focus on a specific task, they could do the same things over and over again without getting bored, and they had very high level of accuracy. And luckily, I had team a large team of software testers. So I actually hired 3 employees on the autism spectrum. As I said, they had no college degrees, but they joined SAP, and over 18 months actually proved that people on the autism spectrum whom we had hired were better than my engineers. They had higher accuracy rate. They never got bored. And funnily enough, they would want to work on weekends because they didn't understand why should we not work on Saturdays, Sundays, right? And they had great attitude. And very interestingly, the team that they worked in, they saw a massive spike in engagement. And I am not saying this is purely because of that, but there was clear indications that hiring these people also increased the morale of the overall team. So that was, I think, one of the most breakthrough things that happened. And then what happened was, I would clearly say, was nothing but a series of coincidences. I spoke about it at the World Economic Forum. Our CEOs heard about this initiative at SAP Labs India. And then in 2012, 2013, SAP made this bold commitment that will hire 1% of our global workforce with people on the autism spectrum. And that, I think, was one of the most landmark announcements ever made by a corporate for a disadvantaged part of the community. And it's been one of the biggest success stories of SAP. And I think one of my personal high point was in 2019, the Best Innovator Award, which is typically given only to either an individual or a team out of 100,000 employees. It's called the Hasso-Plattner Founders Award at SAP. It's like the Oscars at SAP. It was won by one employee who was hired as part of the autism program.
So you mean this employee was given that award because of some innovation that he had done?
Yes, he was from the finance department, and he built a product which dramatically reduced the processing time of many of the financial documents. And across all the competition, his idea was considered the best. Not just the idea, he implemented it himself. He was an employee from our office in Argentina. So you see, what started in labs Bangalore is now across more than 150 companies have implemented their own autism at work program. And the employee who got the opportunity was in Argentina. I mean, I would have never thought that a small act of hiring 3 employees could have such a massive ripple effect.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. The story keeps getting richer with every time that there is some space between the last time I've heard it and this time I've heard it, because there are new developments that are happening. As this, I think this consciousness is starting to grow, isn't it? In the business world, it's still at the early stage, but it's starting to grow. And people like you are at the forefront of actually building that bridge between the kind of world that we all aspire to operate in and create and the kind of world we live in today. You're helping us build that bridge, and that is so powerful. I think I'm so grateful for the example that you set for all of us. So how's it going for you in your own personal journey between your wife and you and your son?
It is, let's not take away the part that, I always say there are the day-to-day struggles. As I said, he's now 11 years old, he's nonverbal. But our biggest challenge is to really understand what's going in his mind, because he's not able to express himself, and that creates a lot of frustration. But one of the reasons I moved to the US a few years back was to provide him with a better education. So touchwood, he's doing well. His health has improved. He's now on 6th standard, and he communicates through his mother and me. So me and my wife is kind of his communication partner. He's able to communicate by what we call as using a letterboard. So he can point at alphabets and share his thoughts. And it's just incredible how amazing he is. And his cognitive ability is just out of the world. And we never knew that. Now he's able to write sentences, and, it's just amazing how he's able to think in extremely profound ways for a kid of his age. But we are only able to know that because now he's able to at least express himself in a few words. So we are grateful, Professor, that life has been kind to us. So I think he's doing well. Touch wood.
Yeah, it's grateful. Thank you. There's something beautiful you mentioned once that your wife said to you about
Yeah.
your role and her role and how you sort of like divide and conquer.
Yeah. I think this was, one of those moments, right, Professor, in our life when we struggle hard. Sometimes we think that, this is too hard. This is where, can you continue on this journey for a long time? And she said something very profound. She said, Feroz, why don't you change the world for Vivan while I change Vivan for the world? And it came from a place where she was also very successful at SAP, and she'd spent a decade at SAP, but she gave up everything to take care of my son. And I recognized the fact that it was actually way harder for her than it was for me. I was still working at SAP and doing a lot of things, but she had to give up on a lot of her ambitions to take care of my son. Luckily, she's got back to now a work right now. But you kind of have to look at it from two sides, but also come together. So I make it a point today that I am an integral part of his classroom activities. In fact, as soon as this call gets over, I actually will be doing his physical training classroom on Zoom. So I think you have to contribute in equal measure, but maybe you look at one aspect more deeply and she's looking at the other aspect more deeply. But I have great regard for what she has done and what she continues to do. And so, but we sometimes come from two different directions. As long as we meet together and have a common understanding, I think that's something which is what we are always striving to. It's never perfect, always more to do. And I always say, when people say such glowing things about me, I keep saying, why don't you validate with my wife? She will not necessarily agree to most of it, but I think she's been a great partner in this journey.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. I want to share very beautiful reconnection that is happening here in front of us. Jonah, thanks for writing to me as well the other day. And he's saying, hi, Feroz. I'm a former Wadhwa student. After Columbia, we opened a bookstore. And his words. And
Wow.
we provided jobs and training to over 100 individuals with autism.
Amazing. I didn't know this.
In New Jersey.
I didn't know this. This is, I am happy to come visit your bookstore and even volunteer because, you can see my backdrop, right? It's full of books. I'm a bibliophile, and books and autism, and, this is my interest. Congratulations. And I would surely visit you in New Jersey when I'm there next time. That's my promise.
Yeah. So beautiful. And Jonah, thank you for writing this note. And let me use this as a catalyst then to others here as well. If you've experienced similar journeys in your own life, or you observe that in the lives of others who've inspired you, share those examples with us. Share those stories with us. Let us recognize how there is this seed of greatness, that is sprinkled all over the planet, which people like Feroz are exemplifying, and others as well. So Feroz, I want to step back a little bit from the personal sort of experiences that you have so beautifully, in a heartfelt way and an open way, shared with us here today. And I want to have us reflect a little bit on how you have gotten there. Mm-hmm. Because while you mentioned the conversation with, Dr. Kiran Bedi as pivotal in opening your mind up, I have known you for all these years, and I have seen a certain quality in you, which is that you are deeply steeped in certain ideas and convictions. You are not ossified and you're not paralyzed from growth, because one of those ideas that you are deeply steeped in is of humble curiosity, to always keep questioning and learning and discovering and evolving. So that itself is a part of those deep convictions. Yeah. But I've seen you every time you speak, every time you engage, not just in the public moments like today or in my class, but even in the offstage, backstage, private moments. You're always drawing your energy from that place of deep and clear convictions. And I want to ask you that Where does that come from? Who were the early shapers that influenced your path, made you recognize the power of authenticity, the power of introspection, the power of integration between action, thoughts, and words?
Yeah, I think thank you for asking that, because I think this is such a powerful question. And when I look back at my journey, I am who I am largely because of my upbringing and my parents. Obviously, a lot of people have played a very important role in that journey. But when I look back, I think the the idea of being curious and the idea of giving are probably the two most integral aspects that I've learned from my parents. And I'll give you two specific examples why I'm saying that. My dad started off in Indian Railways at the early level of his career. He retired. He won a national award for one of the top engineers. He retired, and he's 78 years old now, and he runs a hospital, a school, and a college in his native village, all as a service to give back. He's 78 years old, and I can tell you, I wish I was as energetic as him when I grow 78. He is super busy. He's always trying a way to serve the community, and all of this he's not doing to make money or anything. He's all doing this to serve the community. And so when I have that benchmark, I haven't even started about what is possible, right? And he's so incredibly young. Almost everybody tells me, how's your dad so fit, so young? And every time I ask him, he says a very simple statement. He says, when you give more, you live more.
Ah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And so what I have seen him do, and this is not just I've seen him now, he's always been like that. And both, I remember one conversation very profoundly when I was growing up. My dad and mom was having a conversation at night, and they were extremely worried because they didn't have enough money to pay to make the wedding of a maid servant. So there was a servant who used to work at her home, and they had a young daughter, and she wanted to get her married, and my parents were discussing, how do we raise the funds, money to get that daughter of the servant married? And those are the conversations I've grown up with, right? They never differentiated who's who. And so giving has been a very integral part of the DNA that I have seen. And so maybe I lean towards that idea all the time. And maybe I'll close this with one thing that I always say. When Dr. Kalam, who's our former president, he was asked, what is your definition of a leader? And I think that was the most simple statement I've ever heard. He said, a leader always asks a question, what can I give? What can I give? What can I give? So it just resonates with me that the whole idea, when you give more, you not only live more, but you also get more, right? And if you do it in a way which is pure, I think purity of intent is incredibly important in that. It's not about just giving and signing checks and so on, but how pure is your intent? And it can be extremely small forms of giving. So I think that has played a huge influence in my life, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. How instructive, how beautiful. I mean, just so many, thoughts coming to my mind as I connect what you're saying to our curriculum, that we teach in leadership. But just one quick thing that I want to sort of like connect the dots on is, Ashoka, right? In India is a very beloved, icon from history of the past, and some of his symbology, that he propagated across the country is there in India's national flag as well. So he's very memorialized and revered in India.
Yeah.
And yet, I think and I know from our history that he killed a lot of his brethren to be able to make it to the throne. And then he ended up sort of, killing some more to get more and more land and more conquest in the way that, society at that time used to think like great kings should do. And then he had that turning point. And after that turning point, I think one of the key things was exactly what you said. He came to the view that power is not meant to be an instrument through which to rule over people, but an instrument through which to maximize your service to people.
Absolutely.
And that's what you've shared, that you've learned from your father and your mother. How beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you also talked about the power of those dinner time conversations that were happening.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
that you're observing, maybe not participating, but something was being absorbed, some energy,
Yeah.
some spirit was being absorbed. Let's all be mindful of those conversations that happen on our own dinner table as we are silently, through our own examples and thoughts, shaping the values of the next generation, isn't it?
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Something on your mind, Feroz?
No, I was, what you said was so profound, and I think I'll come back to this whole idea that sometimes, I say that success is overrated because it's very singular, right? We think that the individual is successful, which means that, oh, Feroz is successful, but people don't realize there are so many people who've contributed to that person's journey, right? So success is never singular, even though many of us make it to be very singular. I think it's a collective, it's a process, it's a journey, and everybody has contributed a little bit to making who you are. And I think once you recognize that success is not entirely yours, is actually, the whole idea of a self-made man is so overblown. I think there is nobody who's self-made, because you are because of all the experiences that you had. So I always say, no, never get too excited with all the highs, because it's not you alone. And also not to get too depressed when things don't go right, because it's not you either, right? And I think the Bhagavad Gita professor says this idea of equanimity, right?
Yeah,
To not take those highs too seriously and not to take those lows as entirely your fault. I think if you can manage a bit of equanimity, you can sail through a lot of life.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. You've cited a remarkable text that is a great instruction manual for life and for leadership.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thought, yet again. So I want to kind of, as we start closing out, Feroz,
Yeah.
highlight the continued engagement you're having with the issues of our time
Yeah.
and the opportunity that you're providing us through your curious mind to learn some new, fresh perspectives on how to engage in a moment of besiegement, if you want to call it,
Yeah.
with this coronavirus age. So
Yeah.
we won't have time to necessarily discuss this, but
Yeah.
can you point for a moment to the reflections and writing that you're doing in Forbes and Medium to
Yeah.
put more of your thinking out there? Because I think it'll benefit a lot of us. I'm going to ask my colleague Anobik to share a link in the chat window
Sure.
so that
Sure.
those who are interested can double click and go and do some of this reading.
Yeah, I think we are living in very challenging times, and as a technologist, I'll probably leave just one key insight for all the listeners. I think my take is that the biggest challenge that will come out of this particular crisis is that the inequality levels will increase. I think, and you can see that with all the data: the rich is becoming richer, poor is becoming poorer, and so you see a wider divide in the society, which I think can create some social unrest and other issues. And so we should be extremely careful of what we are seeing right now. And a lot of the people whom I speak to are technologists, and most of them think the solution to all these problems is better technology. They think that AI is a holy grail that will solve all problems. And I'll go back to what Gandhiji said way back in the 1940s. He said that, you have to be grounded in strong moral values, right? If technology is not grounded on strong moral values and purity of intent, the technology is not going to solve the problem. So while all the technology tools we speak about of AI and all the new things are incredibly powerful, but I think we should never underestimate that what is most important in today's time is leadership, which is grounded in strong moral values, and pure people, you having a high purity of intent. Intention matters. If you build technology on top of bad moral values and not so great intent, we may not necessarily solve any of the issues of the world. So I would request everybody to be on a journey of discovery. This has never happened before, so there is no blueprint of how to get out of the pandemic. I think we'll all have to go deep inside ourselves to find the solutions.
Yeah. Thank you, Feroz. That is a powerful and thought-provoking invitation to give all of us to go on a continual never-ending process of discovery. I remember another quote from Gandhi. He said, live as though you'll die tomorrow, but learn as though you will live forever. And I think you epitomize that. You epitomize that with all that you do. So grateful to have you with us here today. I'm going to help transition you out and then just close out with a update for everybody about our next webcast. But I want to first start by just, on behalf of all of us here, thank you from the bottom of my heart for the great work you do, the life you lead, the example you set, and the teaching that you brought to us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Hitendra. It's an honor to be part of your show. And I wish all the listeners good health and, to work to their maximum potential. All the best to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Ferose. And as Ferose takes leave, I want to just highlight to you, boy, that was a powerful story, wasn't it? I'm still, stirred from within. I can't immediately get to the transactional piece of like, hey, here's what's coming next week. Although that's a really beautiful opportunity for us to come together as well. But I know all of us are feeling very thankful to Ferose. So next week we have with us one of the world leaders in the field of innovation, Amy Edmondson, who is a professor at Harvard Business School and whose work has influenced and shaped some of my own early consulting work around strategy and innovation. She is particularly focused on how we can create learning organizations where failure is a necessary step towards evolving and over time succeeding. She has written some great books in addition to her research papers on themes like psychological safety and high performance teaming, and more broadly, how to handle failure and how to master innovation. She has been recognized for her work, for example, by being, tapped as one of the most influential international thinkers in human resources by HR Magazine in 4 years over the last decade, and also being nominated as part of the biannual Thinkers 50 global ranking of management thinkers since 2011. I think all of us are going to have an incredibly inspiring and instructive time with this preeminent researcher and thinker that is pushing the boundaries of organizations and society and communities and groups and teams and individuals to their fullest learning and innovation potential. Thank you so much for joining us today. All the best for the week ahead, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Intersections with Amy Edmondson. One quick final note. You are noticing that we are not doing these consistently every Thursday. The fall is starting to intensify, and you will likely see me come to you with a proposition of doing it on a once every 2 week basis. But until then, we might see a couple of weeks where we're not doing it, and weeks then where we're doing it in succession, like what has just happened here. So just stay with us, stay tuned. We're obviously going to be sending you an email. If you receive this invite from somebody else, sign up on my website, hitendra.com, for getting you regular access to our updates about Intersections as well as my newsletter. All the best, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.